Right. Yeah, I've seen a couple of different one of the guy that is in chat right now actually invited me to help him with his D&D-esque system. I'm still on the fence about it. We'll see like what the whole project about, but he's got a team behind it and already has a couple of YouTuber names. A Steely Sam he dropped, and Maple Leaf, which is a Vampire the Masquerade channel. I think we are. I started the live stream. Looking at the chat, it sounds like they can probably hear us. Oops. Still working out. Oh no, they can only hear me. So only I have insulted them. All right, let's get you in here. Let's see. How about some da-doop da-doop. There we go. Here we are. All right, now they can see us. Hey,
Hi,
everybody.
everybody.
We've been chatting here for about 20 minutes already. Quick run through of our questions today. I have with me the lore master himself, AJ Pickett. Dude, I've been watching your videos for as long as I've been playing role-playing games, so this is I don't know what's happening. I don't remember how we got here. So thank you so much for agreeing to stream with me today. Super excited to chat lore with you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So we've been chatting a little bit before we started here, and it's funny to sort of jump right in. Hey, I'm actually watching chat. Hey, Mystic Portal. If you've got any questions or anything, fire away. But we've got some topics to cover as well.
Yep, we got some prepped questions, but we're keeping an eye on chat as well, so this will be fun. Let's start with first prepared question, and that is, which mythological monster or race origin story is your favorite? Because you've covered many, and I need to know.
Well, this is a mythological creature from D&D. It doesn't have any relation to real world mythology, which is kind of unusual for early D&D stuff. It's the Spellweaver, and the Spellweaver is a very, very weird alien race of sort of insectoidy, thin humanoid people with like multiple arms and mostly featureless faces, and many people would recognize the god Nurgle from D&D, from Forgotten Realms, but they don't know how influential this species actually is. And it ties back to this sort of planned first world thing that got mentioned a few times in strange portals and obelisks and things, which are scattered throughout D&D. And if you wanted to get the absolute synopsis on Spellweavers and what their role is, Eric Boyd, who is as integral to the Forgotten Realms as Ed Greenwood and George Crashurst and various others who are still currently writing for the Forgotten Realms, is almost like a subgenre of writers who are carrying on with the real Forgotten Realms, and then you've got the 5th edition version over on the Sword Coast over here. So
they did change a whole lot over.
Yeah,
like
and
I started out
they very much just took the core writers of Forgotten Realms and just put them over here. We don't need you. You're not selling products that we want.
Like I started playing RPGs with D&D 5th edition pretty much right when it came out, about 2014, 2015-ish. And I started like diving into the lore because everything was so cool. And the deeper I got, the more I realized that everything I knew was wrong. Like, I feel like this isn't how it was originally written. Why did they change it? Why is all this different? I've been learning the wrong thing this whole time. So I on earlier streams, I go through my oldest D&D publication. A friend pulled out the AD&D Dark Sun Monsters Compendium Appendix 2. So it's just this obscure random book from a very specific setting, and I'm just going through it and realizing how many cool things they've either changed or deleted or just dropped completely as they go from edition to edition. It's there's so many cool things. Just dig.
Oh, the video that I just released last night on the early experience point system for Dungeons and Dragons, and the fact that experience points, like one gold piece was one experience point, and you could sell your magic items and stuff for less experience points because they're useful to you. And if you the subtle nuances, like if you're it was an easy encounter and you killed the orc and got a lot of treasure, the treasure's only worth 10% because it was an easy fight. It's like, how do you calculate the math on that? You know, it's so subjective and so just, so nerdy.
Well,
and,
I think it was really important. It should be way more than 10%.
It's just like, you got to remember that Dungeons and Dragons was invented for wargamers. It was not invented for thespians. It was invented for guys who have like no concept that this little miniature has got a personality. It's like, no, this is worth 10 points. It's like, no, it's Caspian from the Kingdom of Ashmere. It's like, you know, it's a commander in the army that does 2 points extra damage. It's like, oh, no. So they were trying to get away from the simulationist, just rehashing the same Napoleonic battles and all that sort of stuff all the time. And they wanted to just, like, what about Lord of the Rings? And like the wargamers were like, no, it's ridiculous. Yeah. So they were the new school. It's almost like they were the grognards and the new school role players were coming in. So they were the first edition players in the OSR, and the new 5th edition woke school players were coming in, and those were the guys who invented Dungeons and Dragons. So Dave Arneson was that guy, and Gary Gygax was like, I think you're onto something there. Let's turn it into a product, because he's a writing machine. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the experience, like for instance, the original game of D&D. Sorry, we're going way off topic here. The original game of D&D, the idea was you start off as a beginner character. You're probably going to die. You're in a group of player characters. You probably got multiple player characters that you're playing at the same time. You don't expect half of them to live. So this is where Dungeon Crawl Classics and those sort of Lamentations of the Flame Princess, those sort of vibe, those games have got that vibe to it. Mm-hmm. Real old school. If your character survives, then they get a reputation and they start attracting henchmen and followers and hirelings that you have to pay. And hirelings do all sorts of stuff for you. They transport treasure, they look after your horses, they tend your equipment and that sort of thing. They can go back to town and get supplies for you, that sort of stuff. They can hold the line, hold a door while you're fighting off monsters and things like that. You're not expected to have them front line, but they earn experience points along with you at half the rate that your character does. So your character is gaining a reputation, and they are also tied in with whatever organization trained them. For instance, a cavalier, which is very hard to be a cavalier, you need attributes this high and stuff, and you can only be like of a noble family, etc. Barbarians can only be human and things like that. The cavalier has to be trained by a higher level cavalier up until the level 6, and at which point they can start training themselves just with the usual training regimen. But if your world has all of its cavaliers killed off, you don't get to level up in cavalier anymore. You can't do it. So this whole idea that your character is tied into the game world was integral to the original D&D. Not only that, but the idea that early D&D was all about kicking down doors, killing monsters and taking their stuff. No. You can capture monsters and then ransom them off. So you get the experience points for capturing the monster, just as many as killing it. Then you ransom it off for gold, which you also get experience points for. Then along comes the barbarian. The barbarian hates magic, so he gets experience points for destroying magic items. Where's my gold value for that? Hey, that's worth experience points. It's like, yeah, well, it's worth the same XP for me, so I just broke it. That's what my character would do. And he gets into a rage and he kills all the monsters. It's like, we were going to ransom them off. It's like, well, sorry.
It sounds like it's becoming more and more and more a it's becoming more and more a resource management system.
Not only that, but all the characters level up at different rates
instead of fight the monsters at some points.
Yeah. It was very common to have a magic user that was 6 or 7 levels behind the fighters and things like that, because the magic user it took them so long to level up. It was drastically unfair. That's why magic users have got very powerful spells that are so unbalanced compared to other classes. And this whole idea of balancing everything, you had to reinvent the entire system of D&D to do that. And so it's like, how do you hold on to the vibe of D&D and change everything so that everybody's happy and there's no disruptive players that come in with a barbarian or this sort of thing? It's like, you thought Kenders were problematic? No, barbarians were the original problematic character class.
I'm slowly learning exactly how difficult actually balancing a game is as I'm designing my own. And oh my god, like I cannot test it enough. Like there's so many little pieces that can affect it. And originally I was like, if I make a mathless game, I won't have to do any math to create it. Not getting away with that.
No. Just, you need players who, the idea is like, you've got a certain amount of skill buy-in for those sort of diceless systems and things. Like the player needs to know what a character is, what an alignment is, or just a basic framework of how to play a D&D game. Otherwise it's just you're playing fantasy football. But okay, back to Spellweavers.
Yes, back to on track.
Back to Spellweavers. So Spellweavers are this alien species that existed in a timescape before the existing universe. So they changed time so radically that they basically Rick and Morty'd and then made reality into a parallel dimension. And where they originally came from is no more. They destroyed it. So back then, there was just one giant world, one giant plane of existence. There was no astral sea. There was no elemental chaos. It was all completely separate from each other. And there were no gods. There were just primordial beings, ancient old ones. So you were talking Cthulhu-esque type things.
Yeah,
who dreamed
stuff.
Yeah, that dream reality into existence. So you don't mess with them. Most of them have actually retreated to higher planes of existence, higher dimensional states, and they've sealed off the way behind them with this big dimensional vortex, so you can't follow them into the 7th dimension where you're connected and are aware of all the different dimensions around you. So the old ones are watching everything and a part of everything, but they're completely separate. And one day they will return. So the Spellweavers live in this basically a paradise as far as they're concerned. There's no checks and balances, nobody to challenge their power, and they just accumulate all of the knowledge of ley lines and natural energies and things like that. That's what the weave is in the Forgotten Realms. It's ley lines and geological force and astrology and all that sort of stuff. I
understand where the name came from now. I always just thought the weave was just like why don't they just call it the veil? Like everything's called the veil when you're going between worlds. But now I understand why with the ley lines and geometric. Okay, all right.
Yeah,
making the connections.
So in the Palladium system, they don't have that problem of the satanic panic and stuff. So they didn't need to remove all of that mystical, new agey stuff from it. And D&D still has all that in there. But now it's called the Weave, and it's personified as Mystra. So Mystra is the Weave is Mystra. Whenever magic is disrupted, Mystra gets killed off and something new pops in. Again. Shar and the Shadow Weave is basically can't exist without the Weave, because it's basically it's what do you call it? The Shadow Web. It's the dark web. It's
The deep internet.
So it doesn't, the deep internet. That's where all the nasty stuff happens, but it doesn't exist without the framework of the internet in the first place. So that's how that works. Allegory and metaphor is so useful for describing things. Now, along come the Spellweavers, and they think, okay, we want to elevate ourselves to essentially the status of godhood before all the gods existed. They thought, we want to integrate cosmic power into each and every one of us instantaneously. Now, if you look at the history of Netheril, you'll see that they have these crystal magical foci that are so powerful that they they empower all of the items and objects around them as though they were essentially feeding charges into magic items all the time, but the magic items don't work away from that field of force. So essentially magic Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
So the spell weavers have, the spell weavers are so powerful they only need one or two of these ziggurat Wi-Fi towers on any planet or even plane of existence that they're on at the time. So there's one here, there's one here, there's one here. So these is where these like obelisks and PowerPoint focuses and stuff. So for instance, the spawning stone of the Slard in the plane of Limbo is one such focus that they were trying to tie together to get the planes of existence to line back up again. And that was driven by a god that no longer exists because she was in 4th edition. Along with Moradin and I think Palor, there was another god called Erathis, and she is the god of civilization and order.
Yep.
Who is great, and I wish they had her in 5th edition, but apparently not.
Well, I apparently was on the same track because I have several cities in my homebrew world that worship Erathis, like almost exclusively. It's fun.
Yeah. You could say that she's one of the most human gods there is, really, and fits perfectly well into that idea of like the Statue of Liberty, or you know, some you know, the idea of the reason why they push civilization into the wilderness all the time and quell the wild is to bring order to chaos.
Exactly.
And that's Erathis.
You mentioned the one of these ziggurat things, these spheres for power Wi-Fi, got sent to the plane of Limbo. The impression that I had and made canon in my world, which I no longer know is if it's actually correct for Forgotten Realms settings, was that Primus, the god of law, attempted to create one of these things and throw it into the plane of chaos. And the only thing that it did was make everything worse because there was evil there and the Slods took over and started spawning from it. Yeah,
what were formless spirits of chaos turned into Slard, actually. Yeah, and
you know anyone who knows that word knows how well that went.
Yeah, the Slardy are you always find them lurking around the blood war between the demons and devils, and they're just nasty. Along with the Yugolos, of course, and the Night Hags, but that's another story. They're also really great monsters. So the Spellweavers, they established this great big magical ritual where they were going to draw in all this power and elevate the entire race at the same time. But they put in a reset button so that they could turn back time if everything went higgledy-piggledy. And they had all these control crystals and things like that you would gather together. And once you did that and said the right word, bam, you would reset the system, turn it off, back on again, and everybody would be back to normal again. Well, so most of them gathered around the crystals and got ready for this. There was a few who were in like suspended animation because they were in part of their they have this like very set lifespan of 6,000 years or so. And some of them were in their regeneration chambers like Borgs sort of thing at this time and were not part of this ritual. And they were considered to be martyrs to the cause, had to do other things while everybody else got elevated. They were the only ones who survived. All the rest of them basically got completely devastated, and they shattered reality so bad that it created the astral plane and the elemental chaos that broke off from it. So the elemental plane suddenly spawned all of this. So the animating principle of the imagination of the Spellweavers that they were trying to imprint on the universe turned into all of the imagination that became the first gods and outer planes, all their belief systems and things like that manifested and became all the outer planes and stuff in the astral sea because it's the plane of thought, imagination.
And what were they trying to do when they did this?
They were trying to all become gods at the same time, billions of them. Yeah. And there were no gods, so they didn't know this was impossible, right? So, and it may have worked in other realities, who knows? So, and then in the elemental chaos, they all their spirits and things like that, they animated matter itself. So they became elemental spirits that were passing through and made up of inanimate material. So the corruption of elemental spirits is what the demons are, and the corruption of celestial spirits is what the devils are. So that's where that sort of divide comes from, that axis of why they're constantly at odds with each other and never the twain shall meet. And the Spellweavers there was a few of them left, and they thought, okay, we need to reset the universe. And Nurgle is one of the Spellweavers who was trying to reset the universe. Unfortunately, one of the gods that was created was Tharizdun. And Tharizdun was this god that wanted to separate these layers and ensure that nothing from below would go through the astral plane and get into the outer realms where the gods were generated doing their stuff. They needed to protect their territory of imagination and spirituality. Because, yeah, it's very tied in that way. So he created the astral dreadnoughts and things like that to eat any astral travelers who got anywhere near them, and that sort of stuff. And he also went kind of crazy because his darkest imaginations and he was so powerful, they manifested and came through from his nightmares and turned into the original Oberiths that plunged into the elemental chaos and became the first demons and stuff like that.
Okay.
So the abyss is essentially his nightmare that was eating its way through the universe like a cancer, his worst imagination.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so all the other gods went, whoa, this is not good, because your imagination is your darkest nightmares are going to destroy the universe. So we need to lock you away in a prison. And one of the things they used to lock him away in the prison were these control crystal gems that the Spellweavers had. So they couldn't get access to them, and they scattered them all across the multiverse. So Nurgle, after much attempts, he rose up the Netheril Empire. That's why the Netherese Empire looks so similar in the way that they handle magic and stuff, and those really ultra powerful crystals that could shear off the top of a mountain, flip it upside down, put a city on top of it, and just float it around. Awesome magic.
Yeah.
And then Karsus, who destroyed the Netheril Empire, that was actually Nurgle. He had 6 other apprentices, and Nurgle was just trying to extend his lifespan by elevating himself to godhood, and he did that by creating a magical technology called solid magic. So manifesting magic as a solid substance that Karsus infused into his body, so he became suffused with living magic, and then tried to elevate himself to godhood at the same time. And it was all just an experiment by Nurgle to remove himself from the Spellweaver's life cycle, because he was doomed to die after 6,000 years or so. Even though he was a god, he was still locked into his basic state of existence. He didn't really want to be a god. He was just doing it to achieve a purpose. He was a Spellweaver. He existed before the gods did. So it's just and meanwhile he's having a fight with the Terraseer, who's one of the last remnants of the Saruk Empire, the first civilization that used magic in the Forgotten Realms. Crazy history. It's just the lore is so deep.
I was going to ask why the Spellweavers were your favorite, but I don't have to anymore. Literally the entire history of the Forgotten Realms, every official setting starts with them before time, when there were no gods yet. They literally created everything we know, or they created the thing that created it. It's so they are basically. That... So when I ask you what your favorite race origin story, you said the only one that matters, the origin of the origin of the origin.
yeah. And then you've got other drifting wanderers who are cut off from the original timeline, like the Lachey, for instance. They're cut off from the original world. Because their original Feywild no longer exists. The Illithids, the Mind Flayers, they've reinvented their own history, so they're actually their own origin story. So whatever they were originally, that timeline no longer exists, because they went back to their planet before they existed and invented themselves from whatever base thing they were, and engineered themselves just to ensure that nobody would get there and time travel before they existed. And so you can imagine that the Githyanki or Githzerai invented time travel, went back to the planet where the Illithids came from, destroyed the creature that they were, and the Illithids were like, we went back to an earlier period, to another planet, transplanted the slugs that we came from, engineered them to make us a better version of ourselves now, and now we control the entire universe. What are you going to do about that?
So they created a paradox in preparation for someone to invent time travel and go back and stop them from ever existing. That's wow. That's
Yeah,
nuts.
then you've got
That is a
the
campaign I would like to play or run. Just like everybody is Gith, and you have to go back and destroy the mind flayers that you've been at war with for your race's entire history.
Meanwhile, you've got the Slard god Yagol, who's traveling backwards in time. So the closer he gets back to the original, the start of the universe, the more powerful he becomes.
I
Or
I
maybe
literally
the other way
watched your
around.
video on this like 4 days ago.
Yeah,
Like,
and then
this
if you
guy is
introduce that
awesome.
idea to brand new role players, they didn't mind just like, it's like what? How can you travel backwards in time?
Reminds me
this is crazy.
In the newer Doctor Who series, there's his relationship with I forget her name, but they meet each other in reverse order in time.
Oh, River Song. Yeah.
Yes.
His wife.
Right. Yeah. So like the first time we see her, she dies. And we keep seeing her more and more and more often. And at one point it's like, oh, this is the first time, isn't it? I'm gonna die now. Oops. And I just think that, like, I know I'm already watching Doctor Who. I'm gonna get time shenanigans, but that specific one really stuck out because it was just awesome.
Yeah, timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly as Doctor Who calls it.
Classic.
Yeah. It's not like a timeline, it's more like a spaghetti. Yes. Only because you keep traveling around and messing with it. Otherwise, it would be fine.
Well, I was going to talk about vampires a little bit and how they came from... their origin was people being scared of how human bodies decompose. They sort of bloat and turn into these, like, pale, disgusting messes. Like, oh, we got what sort of creature could have done this? No, just death, just normal decomposition. But it spawned the legend of vampires, and you look at them now and it's literally the opposite of how they started. They used to be these pale, ugly, rotting things, and now they're hot and sparkly and everything you could ever possibly want.
Yeah, the the sexiness of vampires these days is so very, very weird. And Hollywood has a lot to answer for when it comes to that. Same with role-playing games. I've often said that the danger of role-playing games, particularly like Dungeons and Dragons, how they've taken creatures from mythology, is that kids these days will just associate a Medusa with a D&D Medusa and not realize that it's a Gorgon from Greek mythology, with the tragic story of these three sisters, etc. They have no idea. It's completely removed from its origin. And we lose a lot that way because a lot of important stuff from history is tied up in myth and story and fairy tale. That's how it's kept and preserved. Word of mouth is passing on historical information. Like classic is the ring a rosies, pocket full of posies, tissue a tissue, all fall down. That's about the Black Plague. So tissue, ring a rosies. You've got you've got a thing to hold over your mouth to keep the stench of the miasma of the disease away, because they don't understand bacteria and viruses and stuff. They just think it's bad air. A tissue, you cough a couple of times, we all fall down. You die from the plague.
Interesting. A little bit of a culture difference between America and New Zealand. I learned it. Ring around the rosy, pockets full of posies, ashes, we all fall down. Same vibe, like, you need to burn these bodies because the plague is going to spread if you don't. Yeah.
And you could argue that mass graves and things like that for, COVID-19 or something like that was probably a bad idea. We should be burning a lot of bodies at that stage as well. Because if you have a true pandemic, you can't deal with anything. You just basically have to throw bodies into a pyre and burn them all and hope for the best, And who knows? We might have more and more stuff like that happening in the future. We shall see. Yeah, but I think the COVID situation is a special case for sure. Anyway, grim.
Yeah, that took a dark turn quick.
There's one of the best books on vampires I read was Actual Cases of Vampirism from History, actual mythological and factual origins of vampires from folklore. And one of the scariest was somewhere around Romania, Yugoslavia, somewhere out there, in the thing. There's like city states that have like no roads or anything, so the carriages and stuff are passing through lawless wilderness, really. And you have the occasional stagecoach which would just go missing, along with its people and all of its cargo. And at one point, one of the nobles was just like, "This is ridiculous. We have to track down what happened." Because there was some valuable stuff on there, and we can't have this just lawlessness going on. So he sent out a team of knights and retainers and things. They went riding off and thing, and they discovered that there was a cave cave network that was crammed full of an Aladdin's cave, full of all the cargo culture goods that these people had stolen, along with all the preserved bodies and pickling jars and things like that of the people on board who they were eating. So this is an inbred, horrific situation. I think the closest you could get to it in modern movies would be a recent one by starring Kurt Russell, which I strongly recommend you gird yourself for some horrific violence in that movie, called Bone Tomahawk. And it's a movie that I will only ever watch once, much like Pan's Labyrinth, because you will never have the same impact of just raw, visceral, horrific, inbred, violent sickness impact you as strongly the second time around. And Pan's Labyrinth is like that too. It uses violence in a very visceral way that has an impact. It's not done in a romantic sort of Quentin Tarantino way.
Right.
It's done in a way to shock you. And Bone Tomahawk it subverts your expectations of a Western movie incredibly well. Yeah. And yeah, this idea that the legend of vampires and ghouls and stuff come from people doing people stuff. Ugh.
It's literally it was so like, just imagine being the person that came across that and like having no frame of reference to know what's going on. And it becomes understandable why they said monsters. Like, that's the only explanation. Yeah. These can't be people.
Yeah.
I've never seen people like this before. They're so far removed from what I understand to be human that they can't possibly be human.
And there's a certain lesson there that society can only break down so far before humans will actually do this, because they're not really humans anymore. Mm-hmm. And that humans are a social construct as well as being creatures, animals, and if you leave them to their own devices, they turn back into animals, predators.
Yes.
And you're on the menu too.
Let's move on to the next one. before we start scaring everyone away, all 3 of our viewers. Our next question is, researching monster lore can be its own reward, but making it useful in-game can be difficult. I definitely know it was difficult for me when I was starting out. So what is the best player reaction you've had to actually delivering this bit of lore? Like, what is the best payoff at a TTRPG, at the table, of like having that player know that lore?
I've got 2 examples. One is how I used a monster language in a very, very distinct way, which became like a meme in our group. And the second is subverting the expectations of the origin story of a creature and keeping it consistent in all the games with that group that came afterwards. So the first one was we had a city that was next door to a swamp. And the city, I was planning the campaign the city was going to have basically a fanatical monotheistic culture invading this polytheistic magic using city, and essentially trying to take them over as a theocratic war. That never actually happened, but the threat was always on the horizon. And the city had a working relationship with the lizard folk who lived in the swamp next door. They didn't cross over into the lizard folk territory, and the lizard folk didn't cross over to the human territory. They just traded swamp supplies and things like that. And the lizard folk referred to any area that the humans were forbidden to go into as Harktis, forbidden, Harktis. And that word persisted in the group, and later on, even outside of D&D, we would say, "Oh, well, how's that movie? Harktis, it's forbidden. Don't go there." So it became a catchphrase, meme word in our group to mean anything forbidden or verboten. Don't go there.
That's
Just
awesome.
Yeah, so it's like a code word.
Actual not just memes, but like any D&D thing referenced like as an inside joke among a group. It's just makes the person who designed the game in the first place so it's just rewarding to see people do that.
And the key there was, I didn't realize at the time, but it was that ratio that we were talking about beforehand, 80% familiar and 20% unfamiliar. So it was everything that the lizard folk were talking human talk for most of it, but there was just one or two words that they used in their own language, which they didn't understand any other way to say it. So they just used their own thing. And the humans just picked up one word of their culture, which is so typical for foreign travelers. It's like, bonjour, blah, 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 blah. Sorry, I only speak hello.
Yep.
You know, but that was the word that they learned in lizard folk. So if they ever go to lizard folk territory, it's like, is that Harktus? Is that Harktus?
It's the most important word to know. Yeah.
Yeah, don't go there, human. Yeah, exactly. So that almost ties into the psychology of people, as we remember things that are related to our survival more than anything else. We prioritize things that are survival based, because we're humans, right? We're monkeys that go, oh no, don't touch that. You know, we remember those things and we forget everything else. So if you tie into that circuit in the brain of your player, and so that's why character death is so important in games, because you need that risk of dying in order to make a memory, an anecdote that you're going to remember years later with your team of friends. So it's like avoiding death in D&D actually kills your anecdotes and stories that you're going to have with your players 20 years down the track, because they won't remember anything that happened in the game. So you actually
the details become fuzzy really fast, but but
you remember character
that has
deaths,
like a powerful emotional impact, like a character death. That's something that doesn't leave.
Yeah, so the new school players will sit and they'll be talking to some old school players, and I don't consider grognard or old school to be a bad thing. Like, so when I use those words, please don't get triggered, anybody who's watching. I am a grognard because I still play first edition games and stuff. I still play modern games, but I don't consider any game to be like dead or old. A lot of the old games still have really, really good mechanics and stuff, and they worked perfectly well then. They still work perfectly well now. But this idea that characters have to persist is kind of a thespian thing, right? So in games where they want that character to be a commercial property, obviously you don't want to kill them off randomly from, you know, a falling rock or something like that. But in old school D&D, not so much. You know, teenagers will invent a new character every single session if they can, because character building is cool and they want a new concept, and I want to try this out. And so that's what you do. It's very hard to get new players to come up with have a consistent campaign. And I think that's okay. It's perfectly fine. That's a natural order of things. It's only later on that you start to want to persist and, oh, that was a really good storyline. Let's continue with these characters. Like, yeah, okay. Anyway, so when old school players are talking about, when they're sitting there and talking about how their character died or the visceral, horrible things that happened to the characters, they're not saying that because they love killing off characters. They literally just remember those parts of the campaign better than anything else. And it's something you should probably keep in mind, that in 20 years' time, are you going to have those stories? Are you going to have those anecdotes? Maybe not, you know?
And it's like that might not be something that a lot of tables value. Like, who cares if you remember this game 20 years from now? We're having a blast right now. And if that's what matters to you, that's great too. Yeah.
But, you know, what do you got when you're old? But stories, I remember back when.
I remember the past days when.
Yeah.
I had one as well for this one. It was actually something that happened recently after I wrote these questions for today. It was 2 days ago. I was running a home game, and I'm starting to do what I do and like mix bits of actual, you know, official lore with, you know, just random nonsense that I've and my players have made up. We were looking at Atropus, the world-born dead, one of the elder evils, this, you know, moon-sized undead. And I, in the previous session, like towards the end, did this sort of lore dump on them. Like, this is, and it was impactful because, you know, the players were actually listening because this was, you know, they finally found out what the bad guys are trying to do. They're trying to summon, like, bring Atropus back here. And so it mattered to them, and they actually listened. Next session, 2 days ago, it was I didn't do any prep because I'm trying to practice running a game with no prep, and doing that in the middle of a campaign. Learning is much harder than doing it for a one shot, but that's another story. So the game itself was pretty lackluster. It felt like nothing really entertaining or fun happened. I skipped through like 2 weeks of travel for the party to get back to a location they were trying to go to. And, I was making up NPCs, like little bits of other characters' backstory to tie in, but nothing was really sticking. And, we'd been playing for a couple hours, and I'm like, okay, people are tired. They kind of want to go home, but I also want them to want to come back. So I had originally said that this weapon they found was, a weapon they know about and had a replica of, was used to make a seal that kept Atropos away. And one of the players is a wizard that doesn't know Identify, because they were doing a bit with their character generation, and they were like, yeah, I really wish I took Identify so I could know what all this cool stuff does. And so I just on a whim said, okay, they're with NPCs now that want them to succeed. Then you have a wand of Identify that you get gifted. And so right as the session's ending, he takes the wand of Identify and points it at the replica weapon that they were carrying with them to see, I wonder, like, we've cast detect magic on this and nothing happened, but, just in case, identify it. And the wand shatters, and he gets thrown back against the wall. And I ad-libbed this scene of, like, this is the weapon. He gets a vision of Atropos returning. And they know, like, having that lore already ingrained in them from the previous session, when they actually cared about and remembered, made that scene all that more impactful. When they were learning about this terrible, horrible thing is about to happen, they actually understand what it is. Like, it's one thing to get a vision of something terrible, horrible, and not know what's going on. It can be more terrifying if you actually know what's at stake and what the vision might mean.
Yeah, one of the bits of the Lord of the Rings which I think was handled poorly was when Gandalf discovers that it actually is the one ring of power that this little hobbit that he's been visiting in this quaint little village, where he goes to probably pick up his weed, basically. It's just like, you got what? It's like, he should have been like, what? How the hell? Yeah, that lack of reaction from Gandalf kind of speaks as his inhumanity, really. But if it was me, I would have been like, what? Yeah, it's like what? It's like, do you have any idea what this is? It's like, no, I don't know.
It just turns me invisible and makes for fun party tricks. That's all.
Yeah,
I swear.
Like, it's the reason why I've been alive for 111 years and still like, I should have seen this. Yeah, that was fantastic. But yeah, that idea of a massive artifact being in their possession all along is classic. I love that one. The other thing I came up with was subverting the origin of the beholder in one of my campaigns. This was a campaign where all the player characters were pixies. Be very careful when you do this, people. Pixies are not to be messed with. One pixie in the party is absolute. It's like the deck of many things. It will just destroy everything. But an entire party of pixies works perfectly fine because they can cross over into the Feywild. So half this campaign was in the real world and half of it was in the Feywild, and they were perfect mirrors of each other. So there was this orc army that was assaulting a castle surrounded by a river, and so it was like an island in the middle of the river that this castle was on, and a wizard was in there, and the wizard was using pixies he shoved them into a little magical device and sucked out their power and forced them to open scrying portals into the Feywild, so he could see the Feywild and the real world at the same time. And that caused all sorts of like timey-wimey disruptions because, as you know, the Feywild's like not really in sync.
Right.
And this was horribly disruptive to the pixies nearby, who felt it as a static radio signal warp. It was making everything really bad.
I'm imagining like a car trying to be shifted into gear the wrong way.
Yeah. So they paid no attention to the orcs nearby, apart from when the orcs started to harvest all of their timber in their forest to make siege engines to take down the castle. Meanwhile, the wizard is like, okay, I need to defend myself, and I know that in the Feywild, I don't exist there, but there's a Fomorian who's in the Fey Dark underneath this place, in this chasm where the river is here. So over there's no river, it's actually a chasm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cross over the two places, have the Feywild and the real world intersect and become manifest at the same time in the same place. And the river will drain into all the orcs who are trying to cross the river will fall into the chasm in the Feywild and get taken and get victimized and taken by the Cyclops and the Fomorian king. And the pixies, of course, were infiltrating the thing to find out what the disruption was, and he was just like, pixies, this is exactly what I need. Captures one of them, puts it into the device, and they have to go in there, and of course the pixies just bypass every single thing I put in front of them because they're just ultimate magic ninjas. It's like, oh, you've got a wall in the way, I'm just going to cross over. Here's a spark of light and some mildew. That's a portal into the Feywild. Whoop. It's not there anymore. Whoop, on the other side. It's just like, you're basically Nightcrawler. Okay, all right. So, and this worked perfectly because they could all do this. So there was no disruption there whatsoever. It was just natural for the pixies to do this. And it worked out perfectly fine. And of course, they messed up and disrupted the magical device because they didn't understand what it was. And this is what happened to the mage. This is his death scene. So there's a reality inversion that happened, so that the two realities were trying to cross over with each other, and one moment in time started skipping and creating alternate versions of itself. So new parallel realities were spawning from his death scene. So he's falling head first backwards into this thing, and his head is detaching, mutating, and turning into these spheres which float away, making all these different variant beholders, infinite varieties of beholders as he's going through. And his personality is getting warped and twisted, and all these eyeballs and stuff is spouting out, and that's where all the beholders came from.
And you had this plan beforehand that this guy was going to die and create. You just made up the beholder origin story on the spot. That's amazing. Yeah. And it was so captivating. They were all just like, wow, that's the best death scene you could possibly imagine. And then the castle blew up and they all got frozen in time. And then as they drifted towards the edge of the magical disruption, they popped back into reality 200 odd years later and went back to the village. And the youngest people in the village were now the village elders, went, oh, we remember you, the legends who stopped the horrible noise and stuff. And then the forest was dying and the campaign continued and they had to go. Yeah. But that moment in the story was just perfect. That's awesome.
And from then on, every single game where there were beholders, that's the origin story. So the beholder was like, rah, 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 rah. And they knew that they were talking to the same twisted personality of the Archmage, except now it thought, I'm the real Archmage, and all these other ones are warped and twisted versions of me. So that explained.
That's awesome.
That explained explained away why the beholders all hate each other.
I just had a spark of inspiration that might be able to be added onto it. Is the beholders are not, instead of like warped and twisted personality of the same person, they are all actually created from that person, and it's because of the weird rifty timey nonsense that happened in that instant, they can all at all times still see that happening through one of their many eyes. So they're constantly conversing with each other and this old ancient long dead wizard on a time loop inside a different reality that they can't escape from.
It's almost like they're always running from it and always terrified that they're going back to it, or it may be reversed, or
they each one has a different idea about it. Like some of them revere, yes, this is my birth, yes, good job, this is exactly what we wanted. The others are like, God, why I don't want to be here, why'd you have to,
Yeah, there must be some reason why this happened. It can't be pixies, it can't be some magical mistake, it can't be humans, no.
That's a lot of fun. I really enjoy actually, you know what, this segues really well into our next question. I really enjoy like this story and doing it myself, just making up lore on the spot. So you have a ton of videos on monster lore from all over, like actual mythology, D&D official settings, other official settings. How do you feel about inventing new monster lore when there's already so much to pull from in other contexts, like reference? You can just literally drag and drop random stuff into your world that already exists.
Yeah, so this ties in with it's good to have it if you need it, but you don't have to use it. So a lot of people will say, well, why are there so many dragon varieties? You can't possibly have all those dragons. No, you can't have all those dragons and active in the Forgotten Realms at the same time. Like, most of the dragons are asleep 80% of the time. So there's only 1 or 2 dragons who are actually awake doing stuff. And the idea is, don't wake up the rest of them, you know? And the same thing with, there's probably 1 or 2 trolls. You know, there may be just 1 troll, like the legend of the Hydra. There was only 1 Hydra. It wasn't an entire species of Hydra. It was a legendary creature created by the gods to guard a golden fleece, you know? And the idea that they've got this ecology is something that we've inserted into the mythology, because it's cool to think about what would these things do if they were actually a species of creature.
Right.
You know, but there could just be 1 basilisk or 1 cockatrice or 1 wyvern, you know? Or there could be all wyverns and one of them is a dragon, which all of the wyverns are descended from, you know, all that sort of thing. So you can chop and change stuff. And I like adding in like Japanese yokai and stuff like that, or reimagining those things which have got culturally specific origins and then turning them into a D&D monster through that lens of ecology and things like that. So it's a challenge for me, the vibe of introducing something from that I've enjoyed and turning it into something that my players can enjoy as well with me and get that same vibe and reaction that I have to it. And quite often it's just a gotcha moment as well. Like reusing classic monsters in ways that get players who are very familiar with D&D and get them. Like ropers is one of my specialties. I always spring ropers on people when they least expect them, in environments that they never thought a roper would operate.
I use ropers all the time, but it's like my go-to Underdark monster. That's the only place I use them.
So next time you use a roper, have them in a desert, and the desert has got some petrified wood in a petrified forest where the wood has been buried long ago and it's crystallized, and now the land is eroded away and you've got this petrified forest. But some of them are ropers. So they're out in the open amongst petrified pillars of things, and it's all of a sudden this rope is grabbing them. It's like, what the hell? And they're getting dragged towards one of these trees, and then the eye opens and the mouth opens. It's like, oh, it's a roper. Oh, I got Matt Click, another YouTuber who's old school YouTuber. I got him classically with that trick. He just like had no idea what he was facing until the eye opened and the mouth opened. He's like, you got me. I had no idea.
Because like the first monster I think of for hiding in petrified trees in a desert is actually, just because of the 5th edition art for them, the Yoklal, the demon drow that can turn into these like slimy yellow trees. That's the first thing. Like, so if I saw an eye open on a tree, that's where my mind would go first, and then having it literally be anything else just throw me for completely.
Or you put mimics outside, like you've got a chasm and there's a log, nice convenient log across the chasm. It's not a log, it's a mimic. Yeah, of course that's a perfect place for a mimic to ambush you. You're gonna step on the log, it's going to adhere to you, it's going to flip over and slam you. You know. Yep. Perfect ambush spot.
Or
for
just
a mimic.
like something. Like, it subvert the expectations even more. This is actually a wyvern that has learned how to camouflage itself. It just flies away and starts taking swooping, diving attacks at you through the trees.
Or it's a real log, but it's a displacer log, so it's actually 2 feet away from where you think it is.
And it's not a displacer beast at all. It's just a log that looks like it's just over here. Log. No indication of where the power source is coming from, how it's doing this. It just looks like it's over there.
I've actually got a homebrewed creature, which is called a lurfen, and what it was is it kind of like it was inspired by orchids. Orchids are very, very weird. They're so closely tied in with insects and fungus. Like you can't germinate an orchid seed unless it's infected with fungus specifically found in the swamp, and they're usually they're tied specifically with one insect, which the flowers and stuff are designed to attract just that one insect. Incredibly nuanced, and very, very hard to transport them back from wherever they were found and create them somewhere else. That's why people are just obsessed with orchids. And the idea of the lurfin was that you could get the lurfin to mimic any creature and turn it into a mobile seed pod, essentially. So this creature, as long as you stop it from finding an environment where it can scatter its seeds, it will operate for a few hours. So you can actually clone someone using a lurfin. So imagine a lurfin has cloned a displacer beast, and when the displacer beast dies, it just turns into like a log, because it's essentially just a plant, but it's still displaced. So it actually makes biological sense that you could do that. But if they have no idea what a lurfin is, they'd have no idea what the hell is going on. So yeah, I can give you the lore. I can give you the reason behind that bizarre scenario. Yeah,
got it covered. I love just random bits, like a log that looks like it's not where it is, or a mountain that is entirely blue. Well, whatever. Like just inventing the stories behind why that came to be. It's like even like real stories. I forget, there's a classic term for it, like why it is the way that it is stories. Of like why the giraffe's neck is long, or why the elephant's snout is long. Like the elephant specifically, I remember it was like
Great Green Limpopo River,
like a rhinoceros or something like that, and like the alligator snapped his snout and it stretched, and to this day all of its descendants. Like I love that stuff. Like it's so wacky and interesting, and makes for fantastic stories. So throwing them into, they just fit so well in a TTRPG setting.
It's so wild that we both know that story so well. The Great Green Limpopo River. Yeah, I loved that story when I was a kid. How the elephant got its nose.
Yep.
Although it was probably a hippo, all things considered.
That would make more sense. Rivers and yeah. Let's see. We do have two more questions actually. How? This is a big question.
This ties into.
A lot of people have like reviewed on channels and just throughout since the beginning of YouTube, pretty much. How do you make players care about your world's lore? Like what? Right. How do you make them care about these cool things that you've invented? Because everyone knows, because it's cool is not good enough.
No. So people are motivated by different things, and people think differently. So one of the things is that really opened my eyes a few years ago is that I didn't know that people, some people didn't have a visual imagination, or they would imagine something but they couldn't see it in color. I thought everybody thought the same. I thought everybody had a memory like mine or something, but it becomes more and more obvious over time that no, I have quite a astounding memory. But there's the idea that somebody is sitting there and they can't imagine a beholder, even though you're describing it to them, they would need a picture to see it because they can't make that picture in their head. And so, of course, they're not going to be interested in the same they're not going to be hooked in the same way that other players at the table are. And one of the things you can do in your session 0 is actually give them a little graph that says, on this chart here, how well can you imagine sounds? How well can you imagine visual stuff like that? How much do you need maps? How much do you need theater? How much can you rely on theater of the mind? Do you need visual aids and things like that? It's actually important for people's enjoyment of the game to accommodate their ability, their mental ability. And it's not a matter of disability. It's just they think and are wired differently from other people. So obviously they're not going to have the same sort of hooks if you're describing the visceral of something. They may actually have a visceral reaction to it and be repelled by horror and stuff like that in the game, whereas others are leaning into it. So it's a matter of how am I tailoring this information to their specific needs? And that's something that you need time and preparation for, and just observing how people are and asking them questions about this sort of thing. But of course, that's a big, complicated ask for somebody who's just started the game. So what's a good rule of thumb? Well, a good rule of thumb is less is more, and stick with the familiar, and then just give them a little bit of weirdness. So this is what I was talking about with the 80-20% thing before we started. Get people hooked in with cliches of Dungeons & Dragons, because when you start playing Dungeons & Dragons, you want to have the classic Dungeons & Dragons experience. Your characters are a bunch of know-nothing apprentices, kind of ne'er-do-wells of the village who are kicking around, not really suitable for any particular profession. So they're displaced. And of course, the misfits all sit at the same table in the lunch hall or in the tavern, or they gather together during the specific festival days where they're released from their duties as apprentices and things. So they've got their journeyman skills and stuff, but they really just want to get out of the village and do their own thing because nobody judges them outside of the village. And so they go to the local tavern, and there's a notice board outside, and there's a notice which is being tacked up there by a local farmer who says, "My livestock are going missing. I'll give you gold if you can figure this out, because I don't want to risk my life. If it's killing my oxen and stuff and leaving body parts all over the place, I'm terrified. I've got enough stuff to deal with it without some monster which is eating my cows every night." Turns out it's an ankeg, classic D&D monster. And you need a team of young ne'er-do-wells who are like, "Oh, well, let's give it a go," and have no idea what they're getting themselves. Ankegs, of course, burrow through the ground. You go back into the ankeg nest to find the eggs so that you kill the ankegs and make sure that they never come back. They've uncovered some secret tomb under there. Ho, ho, ho! Here we are, we've got a dungeon that nobody knew was there, and it's got all sorts of mysteries and things like that. And maybe you discover there's some strange language that you need deciphered, so you have to go to the big city to talk to a sage who may actually be able to understand this, because nobody in the village knows what this means. But it's obviously very important because it's got something to do with, there's a full moon, and the red star in this picture is going to be over top of that mountain peak in a few days. What's going to happen with this tomb door when the picture matches up with what's happening in the sky? Now they're starting to get really engaged and involved in what's going on, and it doesn't necessarily... You've hooked in different aspects from different players who they may be interested in what's happening with that thing there. So I want logical consistency in my game, and I want a set order of procession. I want to know when the bad thing is going to happen, and I want to plan and prepare for that in a logical and consistent way. You got the other person who's just like, I love the randomness of the fact that we had no idea this was here, and it's like you're subverting our expectations while using cliches so we know where to go. We don't have to guess how to get to the adventure in the first place. It's like you're handing it to us already, but it's in a believable, plausible way. It's not ham-fisted. It's not playing down to us. We don't have to go, I don't get this puzzle and now the adventure's just stopped. It's like, no, the thing is going to happen in a certain amount of time, but you can either wait for it and just wing it, or you can go to the city and try and find out what's going to happen beforehand. Now you've got a decision to make. And
that gives the players the options, because if most of them are like, I don't really want to sit here and listen to you ramble about your world for a bit, I want to keep playing, and they can just hang out, do something else for that amount of time, and then it opens and something bad happens. Could be related to why the ankeg was there in the first place. Maybe it's some insect creature, that the hive queen of all the ankegs, and all the ankegs have been moving towards this territory for years now, causing all sorts of financial collapse in the farming industry. Go back to the farmer. Your problem's about to get a lot worse. Thanks, bye.
Yeah. If ankegs have been eating a lot of livestock, maybe the trolls nearby who have been surviving, relatively, they've got a neutral alignment, so they don't really want to predate on the humans. They just want to eat they've got a requirement to eat meat. You farm these creatures, the farmers are like, we lose a couple of sheep to trolls, every couple of months, but it's all right. Nobody wants to bother the trolls because they're just terrifying. Now the ankegs have been eating all the farmers' stock, and it's like, well, we can't have the trolls eating the stuff too, so when the characters level up, it's like, can you go and deal with the trolls? Maybe it's
broker an agreement, make the trolls eat the ankegs, and then you're that's at least what my players would do. They would subvert. All right, I've got this cool combat setup, and they just agree with the monsters and give them a better life.
Yeah, and if you know monster lore, of course, you'll know that, the trolls don't want to mess with the Ankeeks because the Ankeeks are going to be spitting acids, and the acid is very effective against the trolls' regeneration, so it makes sense why they wouldn't fight each other.
There you go. That would be a
Yeah.
difficult one to broker.
Yeah, so a little bit of logical consistency, a little bit of game prep, but also the ability to just wing it, So maybe they'll try and smash down the door of the tomb. Maybe they'll wait and go and find out what's happening, from the local sage. Maybe that'll lead into something else. They'll forget about it. Their village gets eaten, They might come back and it's like, why is everybody zombies now? Well, you didn't do anything about it.
Because you let the problem sit. That's why.
Yeah. Or maybe everybody's the same, but like they're a little bit weird because they're now infected by, parasitic insects, which have eaten their brains and they're now inside them, like the hidden, like they're coming out with the tentacle, their antenna coming out and like, what? Yeah. Yeah, it gives them
reminds
that
me of
20% of unknown.
Yeah. It reminds me of I consider myself an expert in what not to do, how not to deliver lore, because I've screwed it up so many times. Like, there's so many times I can remember, like players starting to get out their phones as I'm reading through, reading an out loud thing about, the world, and I'm like, I spent that. This was a lot of fun to write, but they don't give two shits about it. That has happened to me enough times where I know what not to do. And now I'm slowly learning what to do. And my goal has always been to tie it as much into what the players already care about as possible. And I'm starting to learn how to make that up on the spot instead of, having to railroad players into this exact situation where I can feed them this lore in a moment they actually care. It's a difficult balance to keep up of whether you're when to subvert your own expectations and start to make up lore that just canonize something on the spot, or if this is the time to actually read that document. Like, are the players going to start getting their phones out if you hand out this piece of paper?
Yeah, you'd be surprised what you can get the players to handle yourself, to handle it for you. So you give them each a snippet of so you got this big block of information about the region, but it's like, if I deliver this to them in one big go, they're going to only absorb about 20% of it, and the rest of it is going to be like, because you're telling them a bedtime story, essentially. Of course they're going to go to sleep, So what you do is you give this person, this character, this bit of information. You give this character this bit of information. You give this character this information. And when they're talking to each other, they're like, oh yeah, by the way, there's a local lord nearby who's related to the blacksmith that I have been apprenticed under is actually he's the third son of the local lord, but he's not inheriting anything, but he just happens to love working metal, and he lives in this village here. But he's been telling me about the noble, the goings on and the nobility local stuff, this inside knowledge he probably shouldn't have told me, but I know all this stuff now that I probably shouldn't know, because I've been working with this guy who really kind of hates his noble background and just wants to be a village blacksmith.
I gotta try that. Like splitting up the information into, because I have several scenes where the characters visit the library to find out more. I gotta instead of just doing one big readout, make the characters tell each other by handing out only you find this book, you find this piece, you find this pamphlet. That's genius, and I gotta try it next time they do that.
Yeah, so every single skill check is an opportunity to do that, but don't do it every single time. With every single skill check, turn it into some big lore history dump thing. But the opportunity to say every now and then, it's just like, can I use my knowledge skill, or can I use I don't have proficiency in this, but I've got a really high attribute in wisdom. Can I perceive this thing? It's like, well, how exactly is that person perceiving stuff using his wisdom score? And it ties into, why do clerics have really high wisdom, for instance? Because they're constantly seeing signs and portents of their gods around them. It's not just their god, but it's all sorts of other gods as well. So they may know, there's a yellow butterfly that just flew by, and that's a symbol of Lathander, for instance. Why is Lathander showing me a sign and portent here? And the other guys in the fighter's just like, it's just a butterfly, man. The wizard's like, it could be a migration of butterflies. I read a lore book in the history. It's like, well, give me a knowledge check and we'll tell that story, and we'll go back to when you were reading in that library. What specific book was this on? It was like, oh, okay, it was a museum of insects. This particular wizard was obsessed with insects, and he's like, well, he actually knows all about ant egg migrations. It's like ties back into the story. So yeah, you can use skill checks, and something like an innocuous little skill check can unveil all sorts of information about both the character's backstory, ties them into NPCs in the game that can get further their quests if they reach a dead end. And I'm a big believer in, if you put a roadblock, if you put a skill check where that skill check is necessary to progress your game, that's on you, like bottlenecking it and getting to that point. And my other big thing to people is never hold off your good ideas till later. Hit them.
Care about what you care about, but this was good. I've my whole channel is built around like screwing it up and figuring out how to do it better later. So this is literally gold to me right now. And actually another happily convenient transition. The next question we have is, how is the way you deliver lore in your games changed over time? Like, I assume you haven't been doing this like the same way. Like this awesome system that you have set up didn't always exist.
No. So when we started playing role-playing games way back in the 80s, so the first thing that I ever had exposure to was Choose Your Own Adventure books, and that was Games Workshop and Steve Livingston and Ian Jackson. Those guys, Wizards of the Warlock of Firetop Mountain and Death Trap Dungeon and that sort of stuff. And those are still around and still fantastic. And I think YouTube could actually be used to make videos like that, where you have at the end of the video, you like, if you choose to go this way, follow this link to this video.
Yes,
or if you want to go this way,
it was. Oh, I made that for a the D&D class selector. I made one for that, and my god, yes, it works, but it was so much work to put it together.
I know. Just I wanted to actually get
the flow chart. I didn't even start. Like I found a flow chart off of Reddit, and I very quickly realized that making a video for all. I realized I needed a video for every single one of these little boxes that they have. That ask a new question. That's 56 videos. It's insane.
Yeah.
It works.
And they're all going to be unlisted. All going to be unlisted, and you just find them by the links. So you can do it. They used to have a lot easier because you could have multiple links on your screen, and that could work. And there was actually a Star Trek Klingon cultural trainings DVD that they turned into a series of videos that I think is still around somewhere, but the links are all broken. So but YouTube just ruined it. But you can still do it. You can still do it with the description down below. But yeah, as you say, and the cool thing is that you could. I could have the start of the story on my channel, or Mr. Rex with his huge audience, and then the various storylines could be handled by different YouTube channels. So you'd be funneling their views into your channel, and it would work out beautifully for upcoming channels. It'd be like, oh yeah, I'll get involved in the story because I'm going to get all these guaranteed viewers who are following the story from all these other big YouTubers who have got the start of the story, and it just followed. Yeah, I explained this to my YouTube partner manager, and they're just like. Just did not compute whatsoever. So you're going to share your audience with other channels? It's like, yeah. So essentially they get rewarded for the work that they do by getting traffic onto their channel, even though, and also it's the person's got the variety of having a different narrator voice take over and their different writing style.
That's true.
Plus,
That's true.
They can change all the videos on their channel, and the story will be different every time they go through. So they could make the same decisions, and 6 months later, it leads in a completely different direction. It's a never-ending story. The possibilities are endless.
Oh, that's a big project. That would be so much fun to be a part of, or just not to be a part of, just to like experience from the viewer's perspective, just to walk through that and see, like, because usually you look at a single thing like D&D, and you think like these maybe one, maybe two names that go along with it. So you got well, let's say Chris Perkins. That's the person who I associate with D&D the most. And if I don't see anybody else's work in there, I'm not gonna like understand how much work other people put into this. But with this new, like having the project, you can't ignore it because it's literally them, their voice, their face talking to you. And showing you that yes, this is a much bigger project than what you initially realized.
Yeah, so I could start off with my most familiar territory, which would be Candlekeep, of course, or Candlekeep and the Sword Coast. I'm very familiar with all of that, or even up north and Kelvin's Cairn and things. Like I invented what was inside Kelvin's Cairn and put that into the Dark Alliance game. Although I got no credit from that, I was the one who invented that stuff. Got signed off by Mike Mills, in fact. They just hired me on as a consultant, but as soon as Wizards of the Coast took over Took Games, they started exploiting my writing talent, but I knew I wasn't going to get any credit from that, so I quit. And I'll never work for that company, that's for sure. Anyway, that's another story. So I would start off, and then I would, if you're going into a forest, like say the nearby like Troll Forest or something like that, I would hand it over to say V Muse from the Crafting Muse channel, because she loves the Tales from the Old Margrave Forest from Kobold Press, and so she could probably handle a Fey forest encounter very well, and her narrative voice would take over for the forest scene, and all the stuff that happens in the forest would be her purview. So she could explore the Tales of the Old Margrave Forest to her heart's content. There's many videos on that and is twisted and convoluted. Then she spits out various links for that would go to different locations, and then use onboard new YouTube creators and tie it all together. Probably need a Cray supercomputer at the end of it to get it all to work, but
yeah, you
I think
you could have like a different creator for every setting. And like whenever someone wants to go to a new setting, or they pick an option that goes to the new setting, you go to that creator's channel. We do have an actual question for you, though.
Mystic Portal, yeah, I'm reading it. Actual question for AJ: how would you use the god who built and continues to build the Infinite Staircase into Outlands and Sigil using the Lady of Pain's lore? Well, the Lady of Pain doesn't really have any lore, and she should never have any lore. She's one of the things in D&D which the whole fun of her and the Lady of the Pale Knight creature, they are completely mysterious. So nobody knows what the origin story or the true power of the Lady of Pain is. And I like that. And I've never ever delved into any idea of where the Lady of Pain comes from, because there just isn't any, and I'm not going to invent it. But and also we don't know who's building the Infinite Staircase. It could actually be creatures. It could be the higher dimensional old ones building a portal to return to reality. So they're descending back from higher dimensions down, and so this thing is a hyperdimensional object, which is manifested from our perspective as a staircase, but from their perspective, it's a funnel back into the different planes of existence. So it's connecting everything that they're already connected to. So it's like they're distilling their forms back into stuff. So if you discovered who's building it, it would be a moment of absolute terror and horror as you discover that these things which exist in the bicycle octopus dimensions are coming back, and the staircase is their pathway. So your discovery of who's building it would be your motivation to instantly try to destroy it. It's like, no, we cannot have this thing. It's like, oh, no, the staircase is not good. It's bad.
It reminds, it's like, I like imagining what something like that would look like the elder evils or elder gods trying to break back into lower dimensions. I've always enjoyed, it took me years to actually wrap my head around it, but that classic, description of, I'll use a polar bear post-it, but you take it, this is a whole dimension. You can be here or you can be here. If you can bend this, then you can go through at that point, exactly what wormholes are. And what a tesseract is, looks like a cube turning inside out on itself. That is essentially a shadow from another dimension. So if you take a cube and you look at a shadow onto a two-dimensional surface, it's that, except another dimension higher. So
if you look at a human being from a higher dimensional perspective, the human starts off as a a cell and then ends up as a dead person, but it's the same object. Like that is a human. Their entire life story is the human.
Exactly.
And then the specific slices of it is our idea of like we're passing through that as a membrane of reality, which is the present. But the present doesn't really exist. It's just it's a perspective that's passing through it, quantum wave.
And I like trying to imagining how to describe that sort of thing to like in a role play setting. Like you come across this floating object like 10 feet up where no one can touch it, and you can see its best description turning inside out on itself, and it appears to have no structure for what's holding it there, what is causing it to exist, where its power comes from, how it's doing this, because that doesn't exist on this plane. That's from somewhere else. So the infinite staircase idea is just a cool one.
If you look at old D&D lore, all of the planes of existence have got a tuning fork and a specific frequency that they're tuned to. And if you can actually play the tune on like the D&D wiki, it's like Acheron is ding! So to get to Acheron, you need a tuning fork specifically tuned to that dimensional vibration. So the idea that people could also have vibrational states as well. So like the Rick and Morty idea, that whole concept of multiverses, and you're so commonplace that you don't matter. Each individual person in their reality doesn't really matter because there's an infinite variety of them. So if everything goes pear-shaped in that reality, he just opens a portal, kills the version of himself in that other dimension, it takes over that place, and nobody knows anything's different because they're exactly the same. But then Morty is sitting there in a total existential crisis because he's sitting at a foreign dimension, a foreign version of his mother and a foreign version of his father and a foreign version of his sister, and that version of him is dead in the backyard, and nobody knows that he's an alien from a different dimension.
Great episode.
Yeah. So that idea that high dimensional beings would be like, well, this reality doesn't matter. I'm just going to change it and do whatever I want here. So they have a completely different perspective of good and evil, So, yum, yum, yum.
I like the idea of I'm all of our conversations are starting to meld together in my head, and I'm thinking the infinite staircase is actually a musical instrument tuned to different planes of existence, and I'm imagining it as, I don't remember what it's called, but it is it's a row of spinning glass hemispheres of different sizes that you play just touching them.
Yeah. And you had to keep it moist and everything. Incredible instrument. Or a theremin or something like that. Yeah, but the idea that each one of those doorways is just a dial that hits a radio station on the frequency knob. Because when you're tuning a radio, all you're doing is lengthening or shortening
the wavelength.
Wire. Yeah, the wire of the aerial, which is mostly coiled up inside the radio. This is old school radios, and in the atmosphere around us, all of the TV channels and all of the Wi-Fi signals and stuff are all existing at the same time. Just a cacophony of different signals, and we're just tuning into one or the other specifically. So all of the planes of existence exist where you are right now, but you just tune yourself into different dials or change your frequency, and then pop, you're popped into that plane of existence. So it's not somewhere distant. Everything is right here, everywhere, all the time, all at once.
Everything, everywhere, all at once.
Yeah. So D&D has had that concept from the very beginning, from the 1970s. Yeah. Basically.
It's just
they must have been taking some pretty heavy LSD trips back then. I'm looking at you, Gary Gygax.
I want to know what he was smoking. I want something so I can do the same thing. That's how it works, right?
probably lots of shoe gum or something like that. I don't know. Some heavy duty solvents in the basement.
And for as cool as I think this all is, I'm still like, there's such potential just in storytelling that I haven't actually used extra planes of existence for, like, I've used it maybe this many times and never for more than 1 or 2 sessions. Like I've always keep it in, the world that I built, the world that I understand. I never, say, okay, we're gonna actually have a campaign in the city of Brass or something like that. Or like we are going to I don't know if this is any lore or something that I made up, but I've been toying with this idea of a campaign where the whole bit behind it, lore-wise, is there's these elemental gods, one for each of the elements, and they've been imprisoned in their opposite elements plane. So you have this, the water is just entirely vapors, formless, is just this huge fog cloud in the elemental plane of fire. The elemental god of water is, or the elemental god of fire is just this itty bitty little spark, like still glowing rock at the bottom of an ocean. Then the elemental god of earth is just falling forever through air.
Right.
And the elemental god of air is just inside this perfect prison that it can't escape from.
Perfect.
And, yeah. It's just another campaign idea I had. I don't remember how I segued into this, but
yeah, no, that's perfect. Yeah, you can really explore all sorts of just absolutely mind-boggling concepts. But the thing to remember, I quite often keep in mind is that the outer planes from the astral plane are always repeating the same story. So whenever you get to Isgard, for instance, it's always Ragnarok. It's always happening there because that plane of existence is story. It's like the Feywild is tied in with any creature of the Feywild. Any Fey Lord is trapped in their story. They are a living fairy tale. So it's always going to be the glass slipper, the poison, the falling asleep thing. So when you go into their realm, you're trapped in that story too. So, and the classic example of that is the Labyrinth movie, where Jared, the Goblin King, is just as much a prisoner of the labyrinth as any of the creatures in there. Mm-hmm. So he says, in the end, she just has to remember the end of the story, which is, you have no power over me. And he's just like, I never did. You decided to open the book. You decided to speak the curse of the story, which created the portal into my world, into the story. And at any time, you could have just closed the book and left. You were an active participant in the story.
I love, I feel like there's something magical, and Labyrinth wasn't the only time they did, the story about a story, sort of like my early childhood, first exposure to what meta is, just these gorgeous stories about, you, the reader, are the one that has the power in this situation, and you are choosing to, be here with us, like our viewers are choosing to be here with us right now. Right. But yeah, there's something magical and nostalgic about just that idea between like exploring what is storytelling every time. It just hits me.
Like the never-ending story, for instance, the enemy there was the death of imagination, which is adulthood. So it's the nothing is taking over all this wondrous imagination, and it's just like, what is it? What is it? And you can't seem to beat it. It's just this inevitable death of creativity. Because you get locked into your 9-to-5 career and your bills and the kids, the mortgage payments, and all that sort of stuff. It's like, well, where's the mystery of what's behind that? What's inside that log, or where does the river go, that sort of thing. The questions that kids ask that adults just forget to ask, and in what's the other one, The Princess Bride, where it's subverting like the cliches of vengeance and all that sort of stuff, and like just the craziness of that movie is just so classic.
I
actually have eels. It's like a D&D movie.
It really is. I have Carrie Elwes's book on the making of it called What If. Not What If. That's an entirely different book. That's an XKCD comic strip. What was it called? As You Wish. And it's a good book if you love the movie, but pretty much only if you love the movie, because it's about how it was made and how all the that might have been my first peek behind the curtain for movie magic. Yeah.
Oh, and like Mandy Patinkin's his anecdotes from The Princess Bride, like how he's terrified of heights, and and Andre the Giant was like holding on to him and reassuring him, like a big, avuncular sort of role.
Yeah.
It was like, it's okay, and just fantastic movie, and obviously very, very close to their hearts, everybody who's involved in it. It's just a magical time in there, and I've been on like film sets and stuff, and I know that the vibe of a film set can be like a family, and you never want it to when you're involved in a project like that, because everybody's creative and having a lot of fun.
And
like making movies is fun. It really is a lot of fun.
It's the case with any storytelling capacity where the storytelling is collaborative. So the tabletop role-playing games, like the exact same thing happens. Like I find it's very, very difficult to not be friends with someone after even like maybe 1 or 2 sessions of like a really good D&D session or whatever game you're playing.
Yeah. And to tie it back into the local, the recent controversy and the thing which has gone horribly wrong with our creative hobby, well, the origin of our creative hobbies, is that people who are not creative have gotten involved and trying to use it as a product, and somebody who's in a role where they should absolutely be collaborative is not collaborating. And we've got this core bad seed that needs to get just basically rooted out and put back where it belongs, back in the video gaming sphere. Don't touch role-playing games. You don't understand what you're talking about. You're too arrogant to realize it, and you're actually causing enormous amounts of disruption. You've cost this company $40 million in a week or so because because you're so arrogant that you don't want to sit down and play a role-playing game. I'm talking to you, Chris Gow. So, it's like you need to get yourself out of the hobby before somebody else takes you out. And
like you can see it happening on a smaller scale in individual games too, where if a DM sits down at a table and expects to be the storyteller, like the one person, like I'm guiding this story, this is what's going to happen next. It can be very rough. That's not what it can be done, but it's not what happens at most tables. And you need to, if you're going to have that sort of, it's sort of a negative term at this point, but if you're going to railroad a game like that, where you say, this is the story, this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, then you guys are going to feel this way. You need to make sure that the players know what they're getting into beforehand. I have run games like that before, just because that's what I do. I do the hard things to screw them up and figure out why they're bad, and why we shouldn't do it, and how to fix them once, if you do and want to try that sort of thing. And everything is about communication in that case. And if a player doesn't want to be a part of that, you can't make them.
Yeah. I had an instant where I was at just a little local gaming convention, and there was a bunch of different tables. Like I generally don't like gaming conventions because it's always too loud. Like you can't hear what the DM is saying. They need, like gaming conventions, you need to really pay attention to the noise levels and places like that, particularly with people who have a lot of sensory overload.
Oh yeah,
because they just won't go. And when you think about how many people on the autism spectrum and stuff like that who are involved in role-playing games, because it is a creative outlet for them, really pay attention to it, because they are your core audience and they're the people that need the most. Anyway, this is one, I was sort of paying attention to the zeitgeist going on in the whole convention. I noticed that there was one corner where the people that were coming out of those games were just like, more. The energy was zero. And I pulled one of them aside, and there was a problematic, like one of the girls at that table was feeling that there was inappropriate stuff being done at that table that she didn't consent to, etc. And they were obviously zeroed in on that because that's very much topical in the industry,
right?
And that's okay, don't get me wrong. But the other conversation that it needed to be had was that DM was railroading that game so hard that he was narrating what the characters were doing to the players, and I was just like, huge red flag. So I was just like, okay, yeah, And they were like, oh, what do we do? What do we do? And I said, what do you mean, what do we do? I just marched straight up to the table. I wasn't even an event organizer. I just marched straight up to that table, basically sat down right in front of the guy, confronted him, looked him straight in the eye and said, what the fuck are you doing? What are you doing? You've got a bunch of kids here who you don't know, they don't know you, and you're running a railroady game where you're basically narrating some sort of story that you're writing. And he's like, well, yeah. I said, that's not what you do. That is not what you do. So you need to pack up your shit and get out of here immediately, or like sit down at another table and learn how to role play, how to DM, because you're doing it wrong. It's like, yeah, modern people won't tell you that you're playing the game wrong, but you're playing the game wrong. Because look at these kids. You're paying no attention to look what you're doing to them. Look at them. They're tired, exhausted. They're not having fun. They don't want to play role-playing games anymore. So that's all the new DMs, that's all the future conventions, which you're killing because you're too blind. You're not empathic. You should not be in a role where you're storytelling to people, because you're paying no attention to anything coming back the other way. You're just outpouring you. You're being narcissistic, right? It's bad. This is bad. You're inflicting psychological trauma on these kids. It's not fun. You're not DMing them. You're just playing your own game. It's like, right. Go and play that by yourself somewhere else. Don't come to the convention.
A similar thing happened to me. I usually say my introduction to D&D is, I was a DM first. It's not how most people do it. It's like, I find this game, I read through the book, I really want to play this, but I can't find anybody to run it. Fine, I'll freaking do it myself. So I got a bunch of friends together and we ran it, and I was running it, and I was super bad, had no idea what I was doing, but we had a good time all the same. That is a lie. That is not my first exposure to role-playing games. The first time, because my dad actually said, he's got a vivid imagination, he's smart, he's gonna love this sort of thing that I played in high school. So I went to local game store for I think it was Adventurers League. We were playing, I want to say 4th edition at the time. It was brand new, and we were playing game. I had made a character. I was excited to experience this new thing, hanging out with other nerds for once. And I don't remember exactly what happened in the story, because this was a long time ago for me. But what I do remember is there was a specific, how Adventure League works, where you have to kind of railroad it. They need to go here next, at least get them to the next setting. And one of the preset things that happened in the game was the big bad appeared, for a round of combat. And me being a new player, I was playing a drow rogue or something, run up to it, stab him, miss. And the DM's like, well, he's not going to let that fly. He needs to show him a lesson. So he's going to swing at you, and he crits because he didn't use a screen to roll. Rolls a natural 20. One-shots my character. Like full hit points to making death saves. I fail all 3 of my death saves, and I don't get to play for the entire, back 3/4 of the session. And I'm like, I don't like this game. This isn't fun. And it wasn't until, years and years and years later that I realized that wasn't the game. That was the problem. No. That was the person running it. They messed something up. Yeah.
If you're got the possibility of dying straight away from a big bad, you have a backup character for that person. Here you go. Okay, that character died, and now you're the person who's I was the person tending his horse outside. It's come in.
Yeah.
What's going on? I had this little bracelet that alerted me to it's a medical aid thing. I come in with the healing potion. You're like, oh, he's dead. Shit. Grab his sword. Fight. So yeah, do that sort of thing. Even if it's a character a level less than the original character, so you got a penalty for dying. It's now a struggle, but now you're going to be very wary. Oh yeah, death can happen. But yeah. that goes back to the original thing of like never have the possibility that your failure will end the campaign, like end any progress in the campaign or any involvement in the campaign for that character, because that's taking away their agency to play. So yeah, and nobody just wants to sit there and watch everybody else play D&D games. That's why I don't watch Critical Role. Yeah, I find it difficult. I find watching games like a fairy tale. I fall asleep very quickly. It's like, tell my imagination is far.
Yeah. And that's a mystery that I've been trying to solve, because like usually I don't like watching games either, but you know, I'm trying to make a D&D podcast and do actual plays and charity streams myself. Like I love meeting people in this space, and this is like one of the best avenues to do it through. So how do you make it good and popular for people? How do you make them care? And it's a conundrum that is difficult, because I myself don't usually enjoy consuming that kind of content, so it's difficult for me to figure out what makes it tick for someone that does enjoy consuming it.
Well, as a participant in this conversation, at the moment we've got a very good, I hand it back to you, you hand it back to me, I hand it back to you, so we're listening to each other, and then we're giving each other time to talk. At your table, even when it's outside of combat, you say, Roger, what are you doing with your character? Oh, you're still fixing the cartwheel. Sam, what are you doing with your character? You're talking to the blacksmith, right? Yeah. Oh, by the way, I wanted to get this embellishment in this thing. Okay, blah, blah, blah. And you've got this little timer in the back of your head, which is the attention span of everybody else at the table. And it's going tick, 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 tick. And it's like goes bing. Okay, we'll get back to you in a second. Sarah, what are you doing with your character? You were training your mount, right? It's like, okay, well, let's have a little side here, and what's your familiar doing, that sort of thing. You go around the table and you give everybody a moment to participate, and so they're just waiting for their turn to talk, and they've got a certain amount of time where their attention will be, they'll pay more attention to this person, less attention to this person, be a little bit switched off. They'll be checking Reddit by the time they get here, and now they're into like a Twitter argument by the time they get back to there. Like, what? It's like your group's too big. You're spending too much time on each individual person. This person tends to talk a lot, and if you just get them going, they'll just carry on, and they won't pay attention to everybody else falling asleep at the table, because they don't get a lot of opportunities to talk about this stuff in their day-to-day life. He's like a car mechanic, but he really wants to be a paladin of Kalimdor's fields. It's like, so he's going to go blah, given the opportunity. So you need to dial him back and give him a time limit, but don't make it a hard time limit. Just
so what you're telling me, and what I'm hearing, is I just have to run D&D and other games like I would if it wasn't a stream. Bam, easy. I'll keep doing it. Yeah. Cool.
and it's back to like every you talk about something, then you talk to the audience as if they're sitting there and say, hey, would you like to hit the subscribe button? You break the thing, or you talk about a product that you enjoyed recently or something like that. So you tie it back into that as well. Or even this conversation, we've got our set list of questions, and it's like, wow, that conversation tied in perfectly, segued perfectly into that next question. It's like, yeah, it's almost like I'm a professional writer who's been doing this for 5 years.
Alex in the chat brings up a good point that I was also gonna start talking about, versus for like watching the content and attention spans of people. It took me so long to figure out how important it was to like keep people's attention spans, they're much shorter than they look on the shows. Because if you watch Critical Role or some other, show with professional actors playing a role-play game, you watch one person, just focus on one person, count how long it takes for them to stop talking and then start talking again when the scene is not on them. It's like 40 minutes. Or an hour sometimes, and that I thought that was okay because that's how the pros are doing it, right? That's there are a lot of situations where watching the pros do something, like you can watch a football game, either soccer or football, and you can watch the pros, how they do it will teach you how to do it better. That doesn't really work as well for role-playing games, because I've always thought the big difference between what people at home are doing and what Critical Role is doing is that people at home are playing a game. They are doing this for the fun of the people at the table first. Critical Role is doing it for the fun of the viewers, the people watching, and they are pros at doing this. So they make it seem like it is for the fun of the people at the table. Fortunately for them, there's a reason they're in that field, and that's because this is fun for them. So, for them,
keep in mind, that's a
thing.
very important point. That's a very important point, because remember how I was talking about making movies is fun. The Critical Role cast are not just enjoying the game, they're enjoying the production of making and filming the game.
Exactly.
That is the game for them. That is the game for them. So they're just, their campaign of Critical Role becoming successful and turning it into a cartoon is the best game they've ever had. It's like, wow, we made our own production company and our thespian production can go on forever. And so everything else for them is like side opportunities. But yeah, that's the tie-in for them. Like, I like making the lore content because I love learning about D&D and stuff, because when I started out, I was a player of D&D. I never ran D&D. I was always the player at the table who didn't understand anything going on and had people explaining the rules and stuff to me. I was a terrible player. I still am a terrible player. I switch off and fall asleep at the table all the time. Anyway, so for me, DMing was Palladium, which was my first. I was the one who ran the Palladium games. I was the one who ran Supers games. Supers games are my true love. So D&D isn't even my favorite RPG. Scary as it is, but it's not. Whoa. It never has been. Yeah, I've made all these lore videos about it and know so much about it, but it will always be my second love. Palladium will always be my favorite Dungeons and Dragons game, and it's often described as being a very, very crunchy, hard to balance, like all over the place. But it's all because everything's optional. It's more for experienced players who know what Dungeons and Dragons is and want something different. And so it's always like, well, if you get into a conversation with an actual Palladium fan, it's just like, yeah, your complaints are invalid because I just ignore that. Or I just homebrew that. It's like, oh, you got a problem with the SDC MDC system? Just change the MDC system. They're like, what? It's fundamental to the game. No, it isn't. Nothing's fundamental. Everything's optional.
Yep.
That's the base. What did Gary Gygax tell you? It's like the rules don't matter. This is a case point of like somebody was complaining about this one particular player who showed up and was like, rah, rah, and they're really like, they're bullying people through the game. It's just like, okay, next time that person shows up to the D&D session, everybody sits around the table, the DM pulls out Arkham Asylum or some other cooperative board game, and they start playing that. And he's like, what about D&D? It's like, we're here to have fun as friends playing games. What are you here for? We can have fun playing anything, but you're solely focused on the game to the exclusion of everything else. You're the one that's broken, not us. Yeah.
I enjoy.
I don't recommend doing that because that's kind of a nasty thing to do.
Yeah, don't actually do that. Great story. Don't actually do it.
No.
I enjoy homebrewing like as much as the next guy, and I was always of the opinion that well, not always. The first thing I tried to homebrew was for D&D 5th edition, and I gave like a level 4 rogue 2 cool new daggers that one does extra acid damage and one does extra poison damage, but each one did an extra 2d10 each. At that point, I wasn't an experienced DM, so I didn't know how to solve it, and I said, well, let's just change the rules and say they're an extra D4 each. And he's like, that changes everything about my character, and it started a whole thing. Now, my favorite solution to this is, leave it in. And what is going to come of something being that powerful in the hands of that player in the actual world setting? So like if these 2 daggers exist, people are going to be coming after them. They're going to say, oh, this is like something that can kill something in this way, this quickly. I need to get my hands on it. So you're going to get treasure hunters coming after you. Maybe you can, after the fact, say there was a curse in these daggers, and that's why nobody was using them before. And the guy that sold him to you actually knew this, and now he's gone.
Simple ring of invisibility here that adds a little bit to your lifespan. It's just like, well, the lifespan stuff doesn't really matter to my character, and invisibility is pretty cool, but like, man, it's got so much stuff tied. Like, there's so many different factions. I've got wraiths after me now. It's like, what?
So in sagas, in the game I'm designing, there's a section of the basic rules that gives like guidelines for how to create your own stuff. Like, this is how to homebrew in this system, and it's like 2 pages of this. And in many different places inside those 2 pages, I say it's okay to make broken stuff as long as you know how to fix it without just undoing the rules that you've created. With a whole bunch of suggestions on how to do that, because like everything that happens is story potential once you have enough experience.
That's why there's 2 different spells. There's Identify, which has a specific set of stuff that it does, like read what Identify does and does not tell the players. And then there's Legends Lore. Legend and Lore is like that's when you get the book of history of this item, and it's like, oh, that's the reason why it stopped working suddenly. It's because the moon's in out of phase, or it's the month of Triune in the old calendar. That's why it doesn't work, because it's tied in with the story of this princess. That makes sense.
It's funny you bring that up. I referenced.
Why does it stop working? It's like not got charges or anything. So how do you explain this? It's like, well, you don't know everything about this.
It's funny you bring up that spell specifically, because I actually use that as a reference in one of the promos for this stream.
Right. Yeah. There's Identify videos, and then there's the Legend Lore video. That's me.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
I always thought, like, as a DM, Legend Lore is a very difficult spell to deal with, especially if like you need to know when your players are preparing that spell that day. You need to be anticipating what they could possibly cast it on. I've had players, no one actually ever did it, but they've threatened to cast Legend Lore on a blade of grass. And I have to tell them all the things that have happened in this blade of grass's vicinity, and like the cycles of the seasons. Right. Yeah. Oh boy.
And
I could do it, and it would be fun to do, but it would just be so much derailment for so long.
Yeah. I mean, you could say that your character just collapses in a state of catatonic shock, because there's just so much information which downloaded into your brain. Your brain just naturally just shuts it down. It's like, I can't handle that much information. Does not compute. RAM buffer is, my buffer is gone. Oh, well over capacity. I'm Johnny Mnemonic. I'm starting to leak information. Yeah.
And it's like, in general, how to get better at doing lore is just keep doing it. Either whether you want to research it or whether you want to like make it up on the spot.
Fake it till you make it.
Yep, fake it till you make it. Like for the legendary, god sealing artifact that I talked about earlier. It could also kill gods, and that was its intended purpose when it was created, and that's, what I knew about it. I didn't actually write stats for players to use this thing. And I've homebrewed long enough where I managed to make up something balanced on the spot, where like it fit in with the lore, and I have no problem with the players using it. My solution in this specific scenario, when they found this god-killing artifact, was this artifact if you manage to hit an entity that has a divine spark, their current hit points are halved. Done.
Wow.
That's it.
Nice.
If you hit something that doesn't have a divine spark, nothing special happens. So yeah, nice. I have no problem with you guys using this. You're not going to run into gods until, the final campaign, and this thing is going to be integral to that combat if you still have it. And if you don't, you're going to go on a quest to get it again, because you can't fight a god without that thing.
One of the things I loved about Magic the Gathering is the idea that planeswalkers have got a bit of like the astral sea embedded in them, or like some sort of crystal of otherness that allows them to cross dimensions and stuff, and it can be taken out of them. Yeah, their spark. But it used to be super powerful, and now they've nerfed it quite a lot. But yeah, the War of the Sparkans and that super powerful dragon.
It's another great lore system. Like I love learning about specifically the Eldrazi. I've always been to like Lovecraftian horrors and things that are going to take over the world and can't be understood, except for actual Lovecraft. Like I've read some of that stuff, and it's like I enjoy it, but it's not lore, you know?
No, and he didn't really write it as lore. It wasn't supposed to be a big connected mythos thingy. That only came afterwards, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a perfect example of like the Eldrazi exist outside of things, and it's like, what are they? Well, it's better to define what they're not than what they are. Exactly. They're very, very weird. And when you get into like the higher dimensional stuff with D&D, it's just like, well, you don't really describe this stuff. It's just like very conceptual. Like if this god wakes up, existence winks out of existence. Well, that's classic H.P. Lovecraft. That's Azathoth or whatever, the dreaming god. It's like it ties back in with like, is reality a hologram? It's like, oh, is it the dream of some entity? Are we actually in a virtual reality space, and where the whole objective of it is to forget that you're in a reality, and if you discover that you're in the game, you instantly get ported out of the game. It's like one. Yeah. So our destiny is always just to wake up in the amusement arcade and go, oh, I'm Roger from accounts. Not AJ, the D&D YouTuber. Wow, that was a trip. Boy, that's the best $20 I've ever spent. I have a psychological breakdown now. Yeah. Or the Total Recall movie. That's so compelling because it's like, is he a spy or is he just a normal guy?
That's one that is on my to watch list still. My ever-growing to watch list.
Yeah, the original Arnold Schwarzenegger one embraces that a lot better, even though it's a very ham-fisted sort of a, Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. The concept behind it is really good, and I think a lot of his original movies could be well done, just sticking to the original sort of format. But the new Total Recall is different. I think the successor to Blade Runner was a really good take on it as well. Blade Runner is another one where
it was. We're starting to talk about film. The name of this stream is "How Does a Master of Lore Use Lore in Game?" And we've got completely off topic. But I love that movie. I love pretty much anything done by that director, Denis Villeneuve. And I swear it's not because we have the same first name. I promise. And it's pronounced differently anyway, right? But he did the new Dune movie as well, and once I saw that, I started going back and watching the rest of his stuff. The new Blade Runner and Arrival. Great movie conceptually and well executed. He does something that I've always been trying to do in running roleplay games, which is like these long, slow pauses where the tension is just super, super high. And I haven't really seen it to the extent that he can do it in any other media. It's something I've wanted to be able to do.
Going back to that comment that I had about, if you want to familiarize or introduce something to somebody, you package it in 80% familiar with 20% unfamiliar. That's the golden ratio. And the horror is the exact opposite. So if you want to build tension, give them 20% familiar and then 80% that they don't know, completely unfamiliar. So it gives them that unease of like, I'm out of my depth here. So if they're like that, you describe something in such nuanced detail that they're starting to switch off and get away from it. But they know that if they do that, if they start to disconnect from the game, they're going to get their character killed. So they're like, you got this horrible tension going on where they want to switch off, but they are compelled to watch. Yeah. Oh, it's a cat making that noise.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I can still hear you, but my cat really doesn't like being in the room with a closed door. Yeah, my channel mascot doesn't want to hang out with us today. You do have a few questions in chat.
What's my opinion on the difference between Lovecraftian and true cosmic horror? Well,
the difference between being what can be drawn and what can't.
Right. So with if you watch any of my AJ's Guide to Extraterrestrials videos, you'll see me introducing the idea of higher dimensional thought or higher dimensional entities, and how they can't interact with human beings because human beings have this whole self-ego thing. Like, you say to a human being, you're not actually an individual, you're just a program, a socially constructed program on a group of cells in a body. The cells are actually individuals, but you're not. So when the cells die, you disappear because you're essentially a zeitgeist construct imprinted on them. And you say that to a human being and the ego just goes, no, I'm a person. It's like, well, that's why we can't communicate. And if I telepathically communicate with you, you're just going to be confronted with this whole self is an delusion thing. So that's cosmic horror. They have a completely different perspective on what it is to exist. So that's one of you see a lot of really funny things like parallels in movies. The Day the Earth Stood Still, the remake with Keanu Reeves, and she says, "What are you?" And he says, "The answer would only terrify you, because he's not an individual. He's a constructed body with an alien intelligence that's using it like a vehicle." And that's the norm for higher dimension, for more evolved beings. It's just to construct bodies if they need one, but they existed as a data state most of the time with no sense of individuality at all. Mm-hmm. It's like, whoa, it's just human beings can't compute that. We're babies, we're infants compared to them. So that idea that there's even higher dimensional states and alternate existences and stuff and that sort of thing. And it's like, well, what's the, how do I deal with just like being a human? It's like, just be a human. It's perfectly fine.
Yep.
Exist in the evolutionary state that you're in and be happy with it. It's fine. They're allowing us to exist as we are.
There are a lot of different ways to convey that this is impossible for a character or you to know. Communication is definitely one of the easiest and most common ones. Of like, we're trying to communicate with you, and doing so is causing you damage. Essentially. Yeah. So what's the other one I was talking? The conversation where it's two alien beings talking to each other about human beings and of different perspectives, like their meat that talks with their meat. It's like they're made of meat. It's like, whoa, they're made of meat. What? It's like, yeah. They flap their meat, and the noises hit other bits of their meat, and their meaty things understand it. It's disgusting. Or like how human beings are so incredibly tough compared to other species. We regenerate, we ingest poisons for fun, and all sorts of other stuff like that. And I introduced the concept that human beings keeping pets, like I've got this predator, this living in my house with me, and I understand it and talk to it. It's just like, what bigger versions of that eat you. It's like, yeah, tigers are terrifying, I'd never have a tiger, but that's a cat. It's like, it would eat you if it had the opportunity. Yeah, probably. It brings in creatures and kills them. It's like, yeah, but you have pet mice too sometimes. It's like, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's fun to just take like a step back and realize my favorite thing to do this with is kissing. Like, I enjoy your company, therefore I want to put my mouth on your mouth, and I want this so desperately bad. And it makes no sense from like a third party perspective. None.
Don't even get me started on cheese. Cheese is just horrifying. So your species creates mammary secretions itself, yeah, but you take mammary secretions from another species, which you put through horrible torture to do this. Like, you take away their infants and you keep them trapped. Like, you shorten their lifespan by making them produce this secretion. Then you introduce a bacteria to it and rot it and turn it into this block of semi-decayed carrion milk excretion from another creature. Yeah. But you find the idea of drinking your own species milk to be horrifying. Yeah. That's crazy. That's crazy.
It's so, the constructs we've come to understand, just from some of it biological and natural, some of it just from cultural upbringing. We humans are weird. We're so insane.
I think that's a good point to leave it there.
I think so too. Humans are weird. And we will sign off for now. Thank you, everybody, for joining whatever this has been. We did, I promise, if you scroll back in the video, we do mostly, like, at least more than half, talk about actual lore and using it, I promise.
Yeah. Humans
So,
are the weirdest lore and we're the strangest monsters, that's for sure.
Yep, absolutely. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope you all have an excellent day, evening, wherever you might be. And I will see you whenever I decide to stream again, I guess. Or if you're coming from AJ's channel, whenever he posts a video. Thank you all for joining. Have a good one.